Welcome to Let's Take a Walk, brought to you by the Feld Group Institute. In this episode, Jon, Charlie, Russell, and Mike dive into the rapid evolution of AI in business operations and its impact on the workforce. They share real-world examples from industries like banking, healthcare, and hospitality, showing how starting with routine automation can unlock quick wins while laying the foundation for broader AI integration. AI is not just about cost reduction or efficiency. It's a catalyst for creating value, reshaping roles, and redefining what it means to work in the age of intelligent machines. Now here's Jon to kick off the conversation.
I just want to start, Russell, just with some of your thoughts on the fundamental dynamics that AI is putting on the business and what those impacts are. Just the big kind of pressures and opportunities and changes that are coming.
Yeah. Okay. Apologies in advance, guys. I have COVID, so I may go off camera to sneeze or blow my nose, and I apologize for my voice, but I'm going to work through it here. So I want to talk about four things real quick. One is the pace of change, because it's absolutely mind-boggling. The nature of business work in times of disruption, like what we're getting ready to go through big time. I want to talk about tasks, not jobs, being automated, and the need to consider the human in the loop. Okay. So on the pace of change, if you go back like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and we talked about AI, we were talking about neural networks and predictive analytics and how there's a shortage of data scientists out there. But then, about 5 years ago is when, machine learning, computer vision, natural language processing really started to have application. And then 3 years ago, we got ChatGPT, which we now just kind of refer to as Gen AI. That was kind of like ChatGPT. I think of the Kleenex of Gen AI, because people use ChatGPT and Gen AI kind of interchangeably. Then about 2 years ago, we had, the LLM wars beginning, Copilot, Claude, Grok, Gemini. And then about a year ago, we had RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, and MCP, so model context protocol. And with those things now combined with the LLMs, along with some other little things like advanced reasoning or recursive refinement, where you feed the results from a Gen AI answer back into it to get even better accuracy, chain of thought reasoning, and more recently, the announcement of the A-to-A protocol, which is how agents can talk to each other. All of a sudden, just in 3 years, we went from, wow, ChatGPT is all we talked about, to this explosion in agents and agent frameworks like OpenAI, Microsoft, a couple others. They all have now agent marketplaces, Hugging Face, LangChain. I'm going to talk a little bit about Hugging Face later, maybe. But so in just 5 years span, we went from talking about we're going to run out of data scientists to every job is going to be replaced in the next 3 years, right? So just a huge flip in 5 years. And so on the pace, I would say whatever we talk about today is going to feel outdated a year from now. And this is not a time to wait and watch and see what happens. It's actually time to actually get involved so that you don't get left behind. In terms of the nature of the work, we've seen other shifts from technology. This is my "Are you a Luddite?" section here. So we've seen how technology introduced, initially the reaction is it's going to eliminate jobs, and it actually doesn't. So I want to walk real quick through the internet, right? First, it was the World Wide Web, static websites, and browser wars, which kind of makes me wonder, are any of the major LLMs that we talk about today the next Netscape or Mosaic browser, right? And then, the internet got dynamic. We had mobile and social networks and things like Ajax, and then we had broadband, which got us streaming media and on-demand services and rich software as a service type services. But were jobs eliminated along the way? If I just take marketing, for example, traditional marketing before the internet, you had telemarketers and direct mail campaign managers and print ad copywriters and even maybe some, at the beginning of the internet, webmasters. And I don't think you have any of those jobs out there anymore. You have now social media managers and search engine optimization copywriters and UX designers, head of content and things like that. So yes, jobs were eliminated, but new jobs were created to help create and manage the artifacts that the technology brought with it. And I think the same is going to happen with AI. So yes, some jobs may go away, but I think most of them we should be talking about how they evolve or get replaced with something else that's kind of in that same function, like in my example of marketing. On tasks, not jobs, I kind of have a premise here. And of course, now we're talking about all jobs, not just, marketing. But that jobs won't be eliminated as much as the tasks that those jobs do will be automated. And I also think that those tasks will be automated in a progressive fashion. So I'll call it like progressive task automation. And the evolution of a given job is going to be described in the form of how much of an end-to-end process has been progressively automated over time. And I think it will be over time. So there's not going to be like a instant, we don't need this job anymore and you're gone, but rather the nature of your job will change in a very progressive manner. Now it's going to be quick, but it'll be progressive. And we already kind of have a way to talk about it in the world of Agile. So WSJF or, shortest job first. I think that's a way to think about which tasks to automate first, second, third, et cetera. So we kind of already have a feel for how that might go. And then, of course, that, back to that pace of change, what you think you can automate in a task will change as the capabilities come online in ever increasing fashion, right? So I like to use automated driving as an analog, right? First we had anti-lock brakes, then adaptive cruise control, and then came lane departure warning, lane keeping assist. It was only over time that it took over steering, accelerating, and braking, and now we have self-driving taxis, and they're not totally autonomous because they're geo-fenced, but within specific conditions. But eventually we'll have fully autonomous, any function, any condition in the car that will be done totally by automation. Kind of sounds like AGI. And the military, has done the same thing. First it was autopilots for like takeoff, landing, and routing, and then drone pilots. You've all seen videos of the guys in their cubes actually piloting a drone. Then was autonomous drones, but with some oversight. And now they've got fully autonomous mission execution drones that actually adapt the tactics based on the situation. So there's this continuum. It takes time to get through that continuum, and I think that's how the pace of change is going to play out. And then last is, the human in the loop. The flip side of the coin of automation is, well, what's the human in the loop doing? So we have to look at both of those. One is more about industrial process engineering, what can we automate? But the other one is design thinking and UX and, the human-centric design around a given solution. And then, maybe, I don't know if this is going to take hold, but Stanford University introduced an ADAS-like scale for looking at AI in the same vein, and they call it human agency scale. And, it's a continuum from it's fully human to it's fully autonomous. And there's points along the way, the midpoint being equal partnership. And I think we need to be looking beyond the midpoint. We should, because if things are going to happen so fast, we got to start thinking about what I would call AI assisted, but human supervised. So the role of these jobs will go from doing the work to supervising the work, which has huge implications for UX design, less web point and click interfaces and more dashboards for managing the agents and monitoring what they're doing. So I think that exposes a whole set of new roles and jobs for humans that don't even exist yet to manage the agentic AI workflows that we're going to see. So just to kind of sum it up, I think it's less, back to the people doing the jobs, less task doers and more supervisory end-to-end managers, less people who follow the instructions on how to use the system to more people that can say, here are the instructions for how I want the agent to do this. And so you have to know your business. The business stakeholders need to not just know how to do their business, but why. Don't be just an executor, be a designer and drive the spec of what these agentic workflows are going to do. So you have to get involved and help shape the future, because if you don't, you'll be like the webmaster, right? That doesn't exist anymore.
So yeah, thanks, Russell. Mike, I don't know if you want to add some things to kind of what you see out in the future here, like kind of the, maybe in some specific roles or just different things that you've seen and how you kind of project that into the future and what kind of big changes we'll see.
I think just, based on research, talking to executives I've been around, we all understand there's a hype element to this and there's a reality element to it. And the reality is there's going to be tremendous productivity growth. And I think the business executives want to capture all that as fast as possible. They're not always looking at the other side of the coin, which is you've got to deal with the organizational impacts and there's actually some technology impacts. I'll give you an example. Most of the business executives I discuss this with, they do not understand that a lot of AI work is probabilistic versus deterministic. It's probably the right answer, but it's not like an old piece of code where you had a straight up if then else and it did one or the other, right? You put this input in, this output came out. It's a little different. And so that drives a different way of looking at the outputs. It also drives a different set of jobs sometimes in the business. And, after you start talking them through that, they see the linkages and start to understand, okay, this is broader than just me doing like I used to do. I want to pay for a program to put a system in, it'll do X, and it'll always do X, and it does it the same all the time. So there's a little bit of education we need to do. I want to tee into something Russell said, which is I do think it's beholden upon us to do a little bit of education with the business teams. They don't always understand exactly what it is. We've seen all the fads. We've chased all the fads. I do think as a leader, it's our job to catch them up on some of these core concepts. And honestly, probably about 70% of the executives I talk to are a little too embarrassed to ask questions because they don't want to seem like they don't know. So you got to do a little bit of teaching behind the scenes without them knowing you're teaching, because you're giving them fresh information. And that they don't know what they don't know, and they're too embarrassed to ask in front of their peers for fear of looking like they don't know. So if you get a chance to, lay some groundwork or sow some seeds of information, I think that's always a good thing. Now, back to where it's going. There's a lot of studies out there between McKinsey, Stanford, PwC. A lot of think tanks have been banging around this, and they think, we're probably going to get a pretty good productivity growth out of AI, anywhere from adding another $4 trillion to the economy over time. But that's also going to come with an offset of it's going to change the way we work and what we do. And these are the things that capture the CFOs and the CEOs. Hey, I want part of that $4 trillion. What they're not looking at is, some people estimate anywhere from 20 to 50% of the business work is going to change, and possibly you're going to lose a bunch of jobs that you don't need anymore because you're automating that kind of stuff. They only see the other side. They want the benefit, but there's a human cost and there's a organizational cost. So, you got to kind of walk through all that with the team. So I think you got to kind of balance this whole thing. You got to balance the excitement of the new technology with the reality of what it takes to implement it, with the reality of, is this truth or is this likely truth? To what's it going to do to my business team? What's it going to do to the tech team? I'll give you a couple of examples. I was talking the other day about, in the old days, I'm going to date myself here. You could always count on your really good business analyst and your really good developers to tell you what really was going on, because they knew the system, they knew the data, they knew what was going on in there. And there was usually one or two business people that had a systems thinking mentality, and they could see business processes end to end. And they kind of knew, if you pulled this lever, these three things would happen over here. When you start replacing that business talent with any sort of AI rationalizing reasoning, there will be less people that understand the business end to end. I don't think they see that coming. I think they see they're going to get some benefits, but there will be less and less people coming through the business that have worked multiple jobs, that have seen the entire enterprise and organization and understand all the linkages. And so I think that's going to come and get them at some point, that there'll be less business people that are really good. And it's kind of like the COBOL PL1 programmers that we have. There's a lot of them that understand all the inner workings of systems, and there's less and less of them. And there's going to be, I think the same thing's going to happen on the business side.
So, hey, Charlie, what would you say to in the executive committee room? What would you say in the boardroom about what's going on? You're on mute.
Yeah, I think, kind of from a little higher level, is anybody that thinks they know where this is going or how quickly it's going, is probably wrong by a lot, right? So we don't know what we don't know. I would be engaging right now on the workforce, the head of HR, and saying, what do you think in the workforce is going to be? There are some places on this call that have 10,000 frontline people, 100,000 frontline people. There's a group out there that I see from FedEx that has 600,000 frontline people. What are you thinking about over the next 5 years, the impact this is going to have? Because I think we're really at the point where the leadership of the IT function has got to reach out to the other leaders and put some onus on them to help think this stuff through, right? There are things that I believe we need to be doing, which is fixing the plumbing, right? Getting the data, getting the platforms, getting the scalability of this thing in place. That is the responsibility of the CIO. But how the workforce is going to operate, are we going to be having trouble finding people? Do we need to develop people? Do we need to, stop hiring because the workforce is going to shrink over time? In other words, if I had a point of view as an HR or a function leader or a business unit leader as to, I'm going to be able to take this workforce in a bank, for example, from 8,000 people in the back office to 2,000 people in the back office. I need to have a strategy. It's not the CIO's responsibility. It's the other function heads have got to engage. And that's why I believe all the models are important. Just about everybody here has been through, why we think all the models have got to be aligned and work together. But that doesn't mean that the CIO needs to figure this all out by themselves. The IT organization needs to lead the thinking and put the onus on the head of marketing, for example. Are you going to have the right kind of talent? You're going to have the right kind of people in the right numbers in 5 years? Or are we going to be able to hire from which schools? You can't not think about things that take time if you're an executive in the company. But again, this is where this chief integration officer and the leader of the thought process, but not the owner of every problem and every opportunity that this is going to create. So it's an orchestration in my mind, as opposed to either playing defense, waiting for it to happen, only concentrating on the technical model and the technical architecture, not all of the others. So for example, if this has what I believe it has, it's going to have huge impact on reshaping the P&L, right? I mean, I think the economics of AI and technology is going to be so stunning, but people that don't think about it in the right way and figure it out are going to end up in the Sears trash pile, right? And, we don't know what we don't know, but we got to get in there and start leading the way, and start doing the things that we uniquely need to do, which is the platform, the architecture, and so forth, but put the onus and leadership on the other peers that you have.
So
Does that make sense?
So you talked about just kind of big stunning things like reshaping the P&L, like a workforce of 10,000 going to 2,000, or a workforce of 600,000 changing shape. These are big things. What do we think Charlie, let's start with you. I know you've been doing some thinking about kind of what's the progression, what's the crawl, walk, run progression, or the spectrum of things that's going to happen to get us there with the workforce, with experts, and kind of what the workforce now can do and how that's going to change. Why don't you start us off there, and then we'll go to Mike. I know Mike has an interesting example to talk through with somebody that he's working with now. So, but just start with some of that thinking that you and I talked about a few weeks back.
Yeah, I think there are some first steps we're seeing in companies where people are actually asking the front line, how do you do this work, right? And a lot of the business rules and how they operate can be caught in these models or augmented in these models for the individual. So you see a lot of companies setting up control rooms for tariffs, for example, or the ability to dynamically price. And they're bringing functions together from different places, and they're from different functions, and they're having them actually work together. And they're observing what they're doing as they interact, and they're starting to build automation models around that, right? Because there are routine things you do: check the inventory, check the time, check the price, check the tariff rates, check the, these are things that people do now. So the first thing is pretty straightforward. Ask the front line what they do and how they could be augmented by some of these tools, right? Over time, the way they interact with each other can be then automated or run through these models, and then it just keeps expanding from there. So, in an airline, which I'm pretty familiar with, doing a irregular operation, which is kind of a funny word because every day an airline is irregularly operating, right? But there's an outage, there's a storm. How do the people work with that? That can be stunningly changed with AI tools. because it's the integration of so many different interactions between pilots and crews and passengers and baggage, right? Those kind of big breakthrough things are what people are starting to work on. And I think we'll see that automate a lot of tasks and reduce a lot of overhead, improve service, and so forth, right? Same thing's true in banks. There are banks that, still take 30 days to approve a loan, right? That could be done in minutes with all of the analytics, with all of the risk, right? So, going step by step and going after the things that people do every day, right? And get those things into these models is going to be stunning, but it's going to require the plumbing, the data, the structures to be able to operate that. We're going to have to deal with the hairball this time. You're not getting away with it. So, step by step over the next couple of years, if you could get the house in order and some of the routine things that go on that cause customer service problems, or the ability to dynamically price, to change your supply chain, basic fundamental business things is where I'd be headed, not the more esoteric things that over time you can make work. So, Mike, I know you've got some examples that you've been involved in that you're on mute, Mike.
Yeah, I want to go back to something that you mentioned as far as zooming out. I think the people on this call, your strategic value is being able to see the forest and the tree. And I think it's going to take that. I think there's a lot of people that just want to vector around, and it's like, treat it like the next fad, but there's more to it. I think we all intuitively know there's more to it. This time, I think the consequence of getting it wrong is a little different. I'll give you an example. You write a system in the past, like I said, you put the if then else statement in there and it does what it does. I don't know that businesses have figured out totally that the checks and double checks you're going to have to do on these AI models to make sure that they don't hallucinate or they don't start giving you a bunch of false stuff. I think there's a whole angle on that we're going to have to work them through. And that's for us to try to teach them and explain to them and put it in perspective. Like I said, you got to be able to see the forest and the tree on this. My personal experience on this is twofold. We built a computer vision model. I was working at a company that does roadside IoT and other automation. And we built a whole cloud-based way of capturing the pictures from the side of the road, going through and doing all the analysis. And I'm not talking about just optical character recognition of license plates, which if you ever want to hear how fun that is, I'm happy to tell you someday. And I'll tell you how many different license plates the state of Florida has, which makes it all sorts of fun to try to figure that out. But doing that requires a lot of training. And, when we first put our model in, we got a 50% success rate right off the bat. But within 3 months, it was at 75%. And after a year, we were well over 90% success rate on that, which in turn saves a bunch of money to the state, saves a bunch of money to different entities, but it also eliminated a bunch of key entry positions. But there was work that went with that. Another one I'm doing right now, I'm working with a medical startup, and they're doing some in-hospital automation. And a very simple one that we're doing right now is, there's all these notes that you take that end up in your EHR, your EMR system. Well, all those notes, all those key punches that they put into the system, all those things turn around and help reimbursement of the hospital, of the doctor, of whoever, from either the insurance or Medicaid, Medicare, or others. if you get any of that wrong, you're sub-optimizing your reimbursement. You're taking on the cost without any of the benefit of getting paid for it. And I know we all say, hey, medical's expensive, everything else. Well, it's really expensive because of the way we process the old paperwork and the liability and everything else. But we are finding, when you build models that start pulling through that stuff and looking, you find things. Not only do you find things that you can work on the administrative side of it, but we're also finding things that we can send back to the caregivers because they're so busy running from room to room and they're so busy punching stuff into systems, once again, for either a compliance or a legal, because somebody sued somebody along the way, that they're not picking things up, that it's even quality of care for patients, let alone the reimbursement angle. So these things do take time and it's an iteration, kind of like I think Jon said, crawl, walk, run, or however you want to put that out there. But it does require iteration and it does require training, but we're seeing tremendous benefits on that.
Yeah.
So
I think it's interesting because it sounds super scary, right? If you have a job today and you don't really understand this, you could see a lot of press that sounds super scary. And I think Charlie and Mike, your comments are of some comfort, right? If people dive in and learn some things about it, whether they're frontline employees or they're analysts in finance or they're consultants or they're working in marketing or facilities or whatever, if they learn a little bit about it and then they understand how they can play a role in helping get there, it's a little more comforting and they can take a proactive role in making themselves more relevant over time. I think that's a positive that maybe isn't as hyped as much as all the jobs are going away. Oh no, what are we going to do? The humans are going to be cut out. And I think those comments are helpful. Russell, I want to move to you to just talk briefly about some of the zoomed out thoughts you have about the journey and just kind of how to think about some of the business progression that goes on. And then we'll, as I mentioned in the chat, we'll kind of ask others here for just stories that you have from your companies or your daily lives. So Russell, why don't you just kind of wrap up this journey part with just some of the thoughts you shared with us the other day?
Yeah, there's a huge temptation to talk about use cases because they're exciting, and I think what's going to happen is that's not going to abate. Ideas are going to be plentiful. The problem is going to be the talent to implement any of them. And so part of that journey from crawl, walk, run, I think has to have a prioritization framework because you could spend a lot of money attacking the wrong things, right? So you got to make sure you're getting value, business value out of the progression. I talked earlier about this progressive task automation. So think, take a process, order to cash, procure to pay, inquire to resolution, map those steps out and then get it down to a task level. So for example, issue, inquire to resolution is going to include some analysis, root cause analysis, developing a solution like, okay, we're going to pay a refund, coordination, execution, customer communication about the answer, and then closure, confirmation, follow-up. Well, inside there may be this one little thing, like, for example, proposal drafting agent, right? So it's almost, think of it as almost like an analog to microservices. It's going to do that one little thing really well. It's going to draft the proposal based on what it got from the agents upstream or people. And so you'd automate that one thing, and then you'd go to the next one using that WSGIF type approach. So maybe the next one is an agent that drafts an email response to the customer. So all around those two agents, there's still people doing the work, but these agents will increasingly take up more and more of the responsibility for that end-to-end process. I think that's some aspect of the progression or the journey. I think another thing we have to think about is the worker side, the other side of that coin I mentioned earlier. People, they don't trust it. They don't trust AI accuracy and consistency. It's probabilistic. It's not deterministic. Fear of job replacement, fear of absence of the human touch. And so I think you have to look at both the soft side and the hard side in determining what to do next, or what's that progression from start with one little agent and then expand horizontally from there. So if you kind of had in your mind's eye a 2x2 matrix where the x-axis is some analysis of the process, what can AI do, and what resources do we have to actually pull it off, and the other one is do humans actually want this, right? So more of a design thinking approach. And so you'll end up with, 4 quadrants, where one of those quadrants is going to be high capability on the part of the company and the technology, high desirability on the part of the technical, the business people. So like something like interpreting detailed technical reports, man, AI would be great for summarizing that kind of stuff. But you'll have another quadrant, which, I would call the danger zone, which is very high capability. AI can do it, and we have the resources around it, but very, very low desirability to see that happening. Like I don't think if you're a nuclear plant manager, your job's probably not going away because the desirability of the human in the loop there is going to be so important. So I think what we need to be doing and thinking about as we kick this off is a prioritization framework that takes into consideration we have limited resources, amazing capabilities, time's not on our side, and don't forget humans can always reject this stuff, and which could sabotage your results. So I think you got to have that some type of prioritization framework in there driving the progression from crawl to walk to run.
Hey, John, just before we open it up, I think it's an important time for us to seriously think about, as we get these crawl projects, the first things to come through, right? We shouldn't resist them. We should run with it, right? To learn and to be supportive. But we need to make a dent in the hairball. We can't just feed these new things data the way we fed the internet, the way we fed the PCs, the way we went through all these eras, right? It's time to deal with it. But if you thought about these crawl projects, the ones that are cropping up, as kind of beachheads, if you will, I don't like multiple beachheads, but maybe there's a better word for it. But we begin to make the down payment on building the digital nervous system, on building the data hub, whatever you call it, right? As you've been through a lot of the training, and we don't just continuously hotwire, right? I wouldn't stand in the way and say, I got to go do all, but do it behind the scene best you can, which means you've got to have the end game laid out in order to be able to see what this needs to look like over time. But having great AI models and tools and terrible plumbing and data and the stuff that goes below the line is not going to be a winning formula in this round. We're not going to get away with it. So however you think about the architecture, go through the front door and ask for whatever you got to ask for, and say we're going to wait a couple of years before we start doing the AI. I don't think that's going to work, right? Just taking every new AI project on by hot wiring, that's not going to work. So you got to come up with something that's going to work, which is get the architecture in your mind, get it sold, and pragmatically build behind all of these initiatives better, cleaner data. So that's my pitch.
So
Jeff?
yeah, so I mean, if you're gonna if a leader among us here is gonna go into the mode of stirring up this conversation, creating a big feeling of this is going to change, it's going to be huge, it's going to have impact on the workforce and the P&L, we're going to have to do architecture, things like that. We gotta have some idea of illustrative examples, and those have got to be by industry. I mean, when you guys have talked about case studies here today. You've talked about an airline or a medical, records company or nuclear plants or things like that. So I'm kind of interested in just getting some variety from this group. Thanks to the guys here, Charlie and Mike and Russell, for kind of teeing up the thoughts. The conversation needs to continue. We appreciate that. Let's open it up to the group for the rest of the time we have here to just, if you could share some thoughts. I put in the chat, might be your company, or maybe, some of you have young adult kids trying to enter the workforce and entering and then losing their jobs right away, or entering and doing different things, or if you know things from friends and family. Just what are some of the illustrative things that you might bring into an executive conversation, an HR conversation, to wake people up to kind of what's happening here? If you don't have anything stunning, also interested in hearing your stories about, kind of, if you will, the crawl, walk kind of things that you're doing here, and what kind of progression you're going through too. So if you want to raise your hand, you can do that. If you want to just jump up and start talking, that's fine. Put something in chat and we'll call on you. Just go for it.
Hey, John, it's Ken. Can I add an appreciation thing and a couple comments?
Sure.
My appreciation is obviously for you, John and Charlie and the rest of the team. I think I run into a lot where I speak, or like I was at some meetings in Switzerland last week, and there's still a lot. There's two things that you're running into with AI. There's a lot of fear and there's a lot of fatigue. So a session like this, and why I appreciate what you guys are doing, is, just talking through it. It's not just about the technology, it's about value. So thanks for doing this, because what I would say to everybody as my passionate plea is, there's a lot of hype in technology all the time. This is the biggest thing since at least the internet, okay, maybe more. And so don't have, any kind of, fear or fatigue. Just go, go, go. There's all kind of opportunity. And if we were at the ranch, if Charlie's still at the ranch, we were at the ranch, and the famous whiteboard there, and Charlie loved to write on it, right? I would put three things up. I would put capabilities up on the left side. I would put, workforce or jobs on the right side. But in the center, I would talk about value. And what that means is, if you think about capabilities, generative AI, generic creating things, agentic AI doing things, but physical AI is the next big wave, and that's going to be the revolution. So what's physical AI? I would just say generically, if you think of turning the world into a live data stream, okay, the, so to speak, patterns of life, and build apps and agents on that, to me, that's the biggest thing coming. And so we have to be engaged for that physical AI. Generative to agentic to physical, in my opinion, is huge. That's the capability side. So if we're on Charlie's whiteboard, and Charlie's always way better at it than I am. If Charlie's on the whiteboard, I'd be talking about capabilities. But that, if you think about it, all that capabilities, the real world, that's the other thing about AI. I have to talk about the good and the bad. I thought these guys did such a great job today. Accuracy, hallucinations, drift, all this stuff's real. And, the thing about, if you say hallucinations, it's models don't always know when they're wrong. So I think on the right side of the board, workforce, I think there's a lot more jobs that we don't even know about. And Russell did a great job saying that. And I think everybody did. But, whether you're talking about simple as QA and compliance and trust kind of jobs, are easy to see that there's a real focus. That's a discipline going forward. So massive capabilities, including physical AI. I think, there's all kinds of new jobs that come from this. For every job that gets wiped out, let's hope there's one or more that get created. But I think the middle of that board is the most important thing. The value that gets created, both in replacement of what we do that's lower tasks today, easy to tackle, as well as augmenting even the highest task. It's like I have a son who's a software engineer, and he uses just playing around like Crew AI to create agent workforces, and he solves the same problem different ways with different agents. The productivity from a software engineer to any kind of a clerk is going to skyrocket. But I do believe the physical AI side, the world in motion, is going to be optimized in the future. Just like we think of when you use Waze, you optimize how you drive your car. So anyways, this is great. Keeping everybody engaged and not fatigued around AI is super important. And capabilities in workforce are really focus areas that have been so well talked about today. And I just think in the boardroom, now to Charlie's point, the boardroom is talking about value. And there's a lot of it in the real knowing the good and the bad. There's a lot of it. So anyhow, sorry, just
Yeah,
want to
Ken,
inject that, John.
even just a small part of that story was just think about the skill that your son had to learn to know how to use AI to get two different ways of solving the same problem. I mean, I'm still talking to people that are not very familiar with the technology, just friends who are like, you can ask AI to do that, and all it was just you know give a best practice or like something like they're like, whoa, you can do that, and just there's a whole set of people in the world that are really getting advanced with what you can do with this, and I just think those learning those skills, if you want to be optimistic about it, is creates all kinds of really cool jobs that make you really productive. So
Yeah,
I like that.
I've talked a lot over the years about, the CIO's best friends need to be the CFO, which is the value hunter, right? They got to think about it differently now, not think about IT as G&A. And even FASB's starting to move a little bit on how do you identify and um, get the value documented if it's revenue or cost. So there's a little bit of a break in the gap stuff now in terms of taking value. And the other best friend has got to be what has been a very sleepy function over the last decade or so, which is the couple of decades, which is HR. I think companies are going to have to build training academies and development of their people, front line, the companies with the best technology and the best people are going to win this, right? And we can no longer treat people as commodities. I think reinventing the leadership development and the people development and the culture is going to win this argument big time.
I just want to make a quick observation, maybe a prediction. As I mentioned earlier, talent is going to be, the long pole in the tent, and especially for smaller companies. And I think there's an opportunity for the Accentures of the world, for example, to come in with new BPO services because it may come down to survival. I have to outsource some of my horizontal processes or maybe even some vertical ones in certain industries. And I've got to just outsource that to a company that's already figured out these agentic workflows that are common enough, to cross, different companies. But I think BPO is going to come back in a different way, but I think it'll be the relief valve for smaller companies that just can't get the talent and the resources and the money to stay up with the pace of change that's getting ready to happen. And so that, obviously is going to create some shifts in the workforce if that happens. And of course, on the IT side, it'll cause even more cross-functional integration issues because now you've outsourced something that's outside the boundary of the company, but still needs to integrate back what's inside. So, there's some issues with it along the way, but I think not every company is going to be able to solve all these use cases on their own. They'll just run out of talent and time.
I think I said this at the beginning, and Charlie said it, once or twice, is just the beginning of the dialogue. And Ken even highlighted like it's healthy to have the dialogue, even if we don't know the answers. And I think we turned up some things, hopefully here, that you guys can use to settle your own minds, to get yourself focused, to come up with some kind of structured how you want to do things, or even just to assure people. And I think if there's people out there that fear this stuff, they would be reassured by this, even though we said some things that could be stunning. Hear about, jobs changing and skills changing, people becoming obsolete or not needing as many people. Hopefully there's some comfort that people could take away from that. And that may be a lesson in and of itself, is have these dialogues in your company. I mean, do a community call like this in your company, and just get the dialogue going there. So
Yeah.
there'll be a lot more to come.
Yeah, John, just let me close up and just with a thought, because I think if you look over centuries, there have been big inventions that have changed the world, right? We keep, using the example of the steam engine and the, electricity and, those kind of things. And, the thing that's different about this one is those took, in some cases, centuries, decades. This is happening very quickly. And if you look at our own industry, the mainframe came in and it kind of ran for 30 years until the internet. The internet was a fundamental change. And that ran for 25 years until COVID hit. And COVID really drove this change in the marketplace to where things have gotten more dynamic. The global world is kind of reordering itself in terms of commerce, right? People realized that there was, kind of shortages of certain things you couldn't get if you didn't have control over them. So there's a lot of dynamic things going on. And you hear a lot about CEOs are waiting for things to settle down where there's more certainty. Has anybody heard that in the news? And well, they need to get over it because it's never going to be that way, right? The thing that's different about this is going to be a 10-year, not a 30-year, not a 20-year, not a 50-year run to where things are going to resort themselves. The pace of change that Russell led off with is just the thing that's making people uneasy, making people confused. It's not that invention is happening, but it's the pace of it. And we need to get good at being able to step back and zoom out a little bit and realize that, these things will settle in and then there'll be new things invented. But it's, going to have an impact on everybody. But we need to have a steady hand as IT leaders and really embrace it. I send Ken a text and tell him I wish I was his age, right? Because this is a fight I'd love to be in.
I think you should wish for younger. I think you should wish for younger. If you have a wish, go for younger. Sorry, Ken.
Yeah, I don't want to be Lucy's age. That would be too
to me
confusing.
for sure. Be that.
That's my granddaughter, but just one more round of this would be great fun. I think this is the most exciting time I've ever seen, and I'm so optimistic about what's possible here. And it will find its way, but we need to be in a leadership role.
I'd pick Trey Segui's age.
Yeah.
Trey, give us a big smile for that one. You're the perfect age, man.
It's an honor. It would be an honor. Thank you.
Okay. It's really an exciting time. I mean, great things are going to happen in so many industries in just so many ways, right? So I'm looking forward to it.